Welcome back. Steve Forbes is still with us. Also, Liz Clayman. And joining me now from Cleveland is Ohio Representative Dennis Kucinich. He's got his own cure for our ailing economy. But first of all, Congressman Kucinich, what do you think of what Hank Paulson is saying and doing with the other nations of the world?
Well, I read Mr. Paulson's statement, and I think the overriding concern in gaining investor confidence again and stabilizing investor confidence is trust. The same people who led us into this dark valley that we're in are the ones who are at the control of this machine. And the same strategies that have failed, they're trying to somehow recut and pass off again as something new. Let's face it, the market rejected the $700 billion bailout. What could have happened and what still can happen is that we can't understand the stress that banks are under because these mortgage-backed securities stocks have fallen, the actually underlying assets have fallen. They can eliminate mark to market, but at the same time, if the government takes controlling interest in the mortgage-backed securities and then deals directly to create a fix for the American homeowner, we can get the money moving in the economy again. I don't understand for the life of me why our government won't do that, because that is the one thing that is at the epicenter of this financial crisis. The fact.
All right. Well, let me just ask you specifically about what we heard tonight. Tonight we heard something a little different. We've heard hints that it was going to happen, but it was spelled out specifically by Hank Paulson that he did plan to take over equity stakes in financial institutions and banks around the country. Is that a good idea or is it a bad idea?
He can say that, but the legislation which Congress passed does not authorize him to do that. And if he wants to do that, he's got to come back to Congress. And so, and by the way, this whole process that's going on without the participation of Congress is a problem, because that's a diminution of our democratic rights, letting the World Bank, the IMF, the G7 or G8, the administration make all these decisions without the people's representatives. This is a real problem.
All right. Well, Congressman, hold on a second, because language is important here, and we did grant Treasury Secretary Paulson huge authority, and he suggests that he has that authority now. And I'll just read to you from what he said tonight. I briefed my colleagues on the work we are pursuing to implement swiftly and thoughtfully the new rescue package. We're developing strategies to use the authority we now have in order to do this. So he suggests that he does have the authority, that Congress granted him the authority to take over equity stakes in banks.
This was the center of the debate. If you to go back and review the debate that took place in Congress about the bailout, the major concern was that there was no authority to take a controlling interest, and those are the operative words, controlling interest in the mortgage-backed securities, because in some cases there might be 20, 30 parties that might have a piece of a mortgage, and if you don't get the controlling interest, you can't create a workout. It's just all make-believe. And if you wanted to get investor confidence again, you have to have solid decision-making and real things that can work other than sleight of hand. People,
I understand, but let me go to Steve. Hold on a second, Congressman. Let me go to Steve Forbes. Let me go to Steve Forbes and just ask him, does Hank Paulson have the authority that he suggests he does have to take over equity stakes in banks right now?
Yes, he does. He can provide preferred stock in banks. I think they're now realizing they're going to make that a much bigger part of that $700 billion than they originally anticipated. As a matter of fact, I'd be very surprised if they buy any of the toxic assets, or only a small amount. Most of it's going to be in preferred shares. And the nice thing about that is you're not taking over the banks. You're just pumping in equity capital to enable banks to make loans again. But unless the banks make loans, this economy is going to remain in trouble.
You know, I would agree with Mr. Forbes. I would agree with Mr. Forbes. We've got to move the money. But here's the thing, though. If you look at what happened in Japan, money was given to Japan's banks. They hoarded the money. It didn't get to where it needed to get. Now, we really need to reestablish trust, gain investor confidence again with a real solution. And I will tell you, I mean, look at the legislation. I would urge you to read it. It does not give the Treasury Secretary the power to get a controlling interest in these mortgage-backed securities, which is the only real way that we can get to the focus of this real problem, which is that people aren't paying their mortgages, the banks aren't getting the money, money's not moving, and the whole economy is starting to implode.
Well, Congressman, he says he has the authority to do that. Are you going to take him to court and challenge him?
Well, I tell you, if he says he has the authority, Congress didn't give it to him. And I think that, you know, this is one of the concerns I have, is that in this crisis, there will be this little document here called the Constitution is going to take a beating. And we need to make sure that decisions that are made that deal with the assets of this country and that deal with the taxpayers' dollars are made with the consent of the Congress. They have a constitutional responsibility to okay any of those decisions. And if Mr. Paulson is maintaining that he has the authority to take a controlling interest in mortgage-backed securities, that is not what that legislation authorized him to do,
Steve,
and it would have to come back to Congress.
Steve Forbes, I know you like Hank Paulson, you trust him, you've seen him on Wall Street as well as in government, but does it give you any pause to give the extraordinary power to a Treasury Secretary that we have given this Treasury Secretary? I mean, that sometimes when government has that much power, as trustworthy as those individuals are, they abuse that power.
Well, in this case, I've been a critic of Hank Paulson because until recently he hasn't gotten things right, whether it's the value of the dollar, mark-to-market accounting, and things like that. But I think they've made the right decision on this, and that is they're not taking controlling interests of banks or the mortgages. What they're doing is pumping in equity capital so banks can repair their balance sheets. That's the only way they're going to lend again. If they combine that with suspending mark-to-market and having the Federal Reserve start to get the commercial paper market moving again, credit will start to flow, and you'll start to see this economy recover.
Liz,
if this is just about the banks and it's not about America's homeowners, forget about it. And because the banks can be all comfy and cozy on this, but if they don't find a fix.
Hold on one second. Let me just let my colleague Liz get a piece of this. Go ahead,
David,
Liz.
all I was going to say is I know it is an extraordinarily touchy situation because it appears that Henry Paulson has so much authority, and perhaps in effect he does. But I've talked to big investors, both conservative and more liberal, on both sides of the spectrum. Both have told me that, you know what, this may have even come too late. They absolutely support what happened. I know from the look of how much the market has fallen since the rescue package came into play that, oh, it's a failure. It's very easy to say that. You just don't know what it would have been had it not been representative for the actual intervention.
And the rescue package is not
Representative in fairness, hold on, gang. Representative in fairness, the fact is I have a lot of problems with this plan, with the bailout plan itself. There were a lot of things I didn't like about it, but still, we haven't seen the purchase of those toxic assets or purchase of equity in some of these distressed banks. So should we just, since you guys passed it in Congress, should we just give it a little time to work?
With the volatility of the markets, I don't think we have the luxury of time. I also think we have to listen to what the market's saying. I think people in the market have concern if the government's in the business of picking winners and losers. What if you're not one of the favored few that gets some government intervention? What happens to your stock? I mean, this is one of the problems when government reaches its hands into the marketplace.
Steve, he's absolutely right, and I saw this happen in Latin America all the time. When you give a little assistance to the weakest link, sometimes you do so at the peril of the strongest links, and the whole system gets weaker. That has happened before, time and again in Latin America when government intervenes on behalf of certain banking institutions. It's the other ones that suffer.
Well, the FDIC has got a very good list of what banks are solvent, what banks they think are in trouble. And you start with the major banks, make sure they don't go down, and make sure they have the equity, and then you offer it to others. The nice thing about preferred stock is you can do it very quickly. You could do 100 banks on Monday. You could do another 200 on Tuesday. You could do 1,000 banks by the end of the week. So you don't have to put in this elaborate thing on this toxic paper, which just is immensely complicated. It's going to take weeks to do. This you can do instantly, as the Federal Reserve could do instantly, reviving the commercial paper market by taking advantage of those excess reserves they have.
All right.
Steve,
exciting times.
Steve,
exciting times we live in. Dennis Kucinich, I wish we had more time, but we have to take a short break. We're up against a hard break. We thank you very much for coming in. And Steve Forbes,
homeowners.
When we come back, we're going to bring in the rest of our all-star panel when Scoreboard continues.